New Orleans sees progress in getting more guns off the streets.
But many are concerned about the recent cases of gun violence among children. Andres Fuentes spoke with experts about solutions to this issue.
As a trauma surgeon and as a mother, it's concerning when you have such youth taken in such a violent way.
A recent string of juvenile violence has some in New Orleans worried. On Wednesday, the NOPD says an 8-year-old boy was shot in Hollygrove. Just hours after, in an unrelated shooting, a 16-year-old girl was shot in the 7th Ward. Police say she was arguing with someone inside of a car who was armed. Both instances came a week after 3-year-old Promise Ordon died from 2 gunshot wounds while she was supposed to be watched over by her father, Virgil.
It is a very small portion of what we see, but it's obviously still very tragic.
Dr. Allison Smith says gun violence among the city's children is just a small percent of the city's and the state's overall gun problem. According to Dillard University criminologist Dr. Ashraf Ismail, Louisiana records 17 youth deaths by firearms per 100,000 people.
This is much higher than the average of 5.8, and so we're significantly higher, which is very disturbing. And a lot of crossfires between the domestic violence, which is up in New Orleans, at the highest levels, as we've heard from the mayor and other entities, really high. School violence up as well, and then neighborhood violence.
Some worry firearms are too common and accessible to younger people.
And that's something that unfortunately a lot of children grow up with that, and as they become adults, that becomes a part of their life.
Experts say the best way to curb gun violence against juveniles is to get guns off the street, something that Mayor LaToya Cantrell is trying to do.
NOPD has seized over 2,351 firearms as of October the 28th of this year.
That's a 4% increase compared to last year. But experts say until the community does more to change gun culture, the problem will still exist.
Children's Hospital has a gun lockbox program, and so they are giving out biometric gun safes and also accompanying with training.
We're frustrated as a nation in terms of how we're addressing guns. It seems like we're addressing it. It just seems like we're just getting more laxed on it.
Reporting in New Orleans, Andres Fuentes, Fox 8, Local First.